Okay, so tell me if this sounds familiar. You finally escape Scientology or some other high control nightmare, and you think, great, I'm free. And then bam, you end up in a relationship with someone who acts suspiciously like another dictator. What the heck happened? Did you accidentally step into another cult? Or are you just cursed? Spoiler, it's not you. It is your trauma tracks, though. Repeat abuse is not only valid, but relatable for many survivors of cult-like environments and abusive relationships. Parallels between subsequent experiences in abusive relationships are well documented in trauma research. Let's break it down and explore some of the key points. In Scientology, relationships are transactional. Your value is based on how well you follow the rules, how much you produce, or how much you contribute. There's no unconditional anything. You learn that acceptance and approval have to be earned, and worse, they can be taken away. When you grow up in that kind of system, it's easy to fall into relationships that mirror those dynamics because it's all you've ever known. The cycle looks something like this. They make you feel special at first, love bombing. Then they criticize or control you, saying it's for your own good. Before long, you feel stuck, believing you need them to survive or that it's your fault if things aren't working. Sound familiar? It's the same playbook. Being made to feel worthless, isolated, fearful of leaving, and intermittently rewarded is textbook cyclical abuse. This refers to a repeating pattern of abusive behaviors interspersed with moments of calm or apparent kindness, creating a cycle that keeps you emotionally and psychologically off balance, confused, and trapped. The cycle typically consists of 4 phases. 1. Tension building. Stress and tension escalate. You sense something is wrong and may try to placate the abuser to avoid an explosion. 2. Incident. The explosion. The abuser lashes out with physical, emotional, or verbal abuse. 3. Reconciliation. The honeymoon phase. The abuser apologizes, promises change, or acts kind and loving to regain your trust. 4. Calm. After the storm, a period of relative peace where everything seems fine until the tension begins building again. This cycle creates confusion, dependency, and fear, making it difficult to leave because the moments of kindness provide false hope that things will improve. And in Scientology, cyclical abuse is deeply embedded in the system, reinforced by its doctrine, policies, and leadership dynamics. Here are some cyclical abuse examples. 1. A Scientologist is told they're out ethics, acting improperly or not meeting expectations. This could be because of slow spiritual progress, insufficient donations, or perceived misconduct. Fear of repercussions, like being sent to ethics, begins to build. The individual is punished. This could mean public shaming, intense interrogations, security checks, being assigned lower conditions, physical labor, or exclusion from the group. After completing their amends project, they're told they've handled it and might even receive acknowledgement or praise for their efforts. They feel relief and hope that they're back on track, only for the cycle to restart when another infraction, real or imagined, is identified. 2. Members are repeatedly pressured to donate money, often way beyond their means. They're told that their lack of contribution is harming their spiritual progress or the group's success. Intense sales tactics or coercion escalate. Members are guilt-tripped, bullied, or told they're out exchange, which means not giving enough compared to what they receive. This can feel aggressive and overwhelming. Once they give in and make a donation, they're praised and celebrated. They may be given a certificate, a status title, or public acknowledgement, making them feel valued and part of the group again. They experience a brief period of relief before the next round of financial demands begins. 3. A member is suspected of being influenced by suppressive persons, SPs, or acting in ways that aren't fully aligned with Scientology. The threat of disconnection looms, creating anxiety. They're ordered to disconnect from loved ones or face consequences themselves, such as being declared an SP or losing access to the group and its resources. This can lead to deep emotional pain and isolation. If they comply, they're told they've done the ethical thing. They may be praised for their dedication to Scientology and experience relief from the pressure. For a while, everything feels stable until the next perceived breach of loyalty arises. 4. Sea Org members are constantly under pressure to meet extreme production goals. Failure to meet these quotas creates fear of disciplinary action. Punishment is swift and severe. Even longer hours, more sleep deprivation, physical labor, and public humiliation. Members are yelled at in front of their peers and assigned a lower condition. If they make it up the conditions or exceed expectations, they're praised or even rewarded, granted minor privileges like a few hours off or a better meal. The workplace stress eases temporarily until the next demand or failure. 5. A public Scientology child is struggling in school. They're told bad grades mean they have misunderstood words, confusions, or out ethics, hidden wrongdoings. The parents insist the child must handle it by doing Scientology study drills or taking courses, even if it means sacrificing hobbies, friendships, summer break, or other interests. If this doesn't resolve, next come the interrogations, punishment, and making up any damage done. The child feels growing anxiety about their school performance and the pressure to conform to Scientology's standards. They fear being labeled out ethics or disappointing their parents. The parents criticize or scold the child for their grades, claiming they're being irresponsible or out integrity. After the child completes Scientology training, corrections, or ethics programs to handle their issues, they're praised for their dedication and told they're upstat and on the right path again. For a short time, the family dynamic feels stable, but the cycle restarts as soon as the child's performance falters. They step out of line, or, God forbid, express dissatisfaction with Scientology solutions. 6. A Sea Org kid assigned an impossible quota is working long hours without training, adequate rest, or food. When they can't meet expectations, they're accused of being downstat, unproductive. The child feels mounting pressure as the deadline for the quota approaches. Supervisors and peers begin to isolate them, hinting that they're a liability. They are reprimanded in front of their peers, assigned lower conditions, or made to do degrading labor as punishment. After completing an amends project or showing improvement, they're told they've made it go right, got their exchange in, got back on purpose. They might be given minor praise or a brief reprieve from punishment. For a short while, they feel relief and hope, but the cycle begins again with the next unattainable demand. 7. A child grows up in a family where a parent is highly critical and emotionally unpredictable. The parent often blames the child for household problems, but at other times, they act loving and supportive. The child notices their parent becoming increasingly irritable, snapping at small things like forgetting to clean their room or spilling a drink. The child tries to be perfect to avoid setting the parent off. The parent yells at the child, calls them lazy or ungrateful, and may even withhold privileges like grounding them or taking away something important. After some time, the parent apologizes or pretends the outburst never happened. They might offer a small gesture of kindness, like cooking the child's favorite meal or letting them stay up late. Things seem stable and the child hopes their parents' love and kindness will last. But inevitably, the parent's mood shifts again, and the cycle repeats. This dynamic conditions the child to constantly monitor the parent's emotional state, taking responsibility for their behavior and internalizing blame for the conflict. 8. A person with anxious attachment is in a relationship with a partner who uses silent treatment against them as a form of punishment whenever there's a disagreement or unmet expectation. The anxious partner senses that something is wrong. Perhaps their partner seems distant or curt. They start over-analyzing their behavior, wondering what they did wrong, and trying to anticipate how to fix it. The partner stops speaking to them entirely, refusing to answer calls or texts. They withdraw affection and connection, leaving the anxious partner in emotional distress, craving resolution. After days of silence, the partner finally re-engages, offering vague explanations like, "I needed time to think," or blaming the anxious partner for being too much. They might offer affection to reassure them that everything is okay. The anxious partner feels relieved and clings to the relationship even harder, hoping to avoid future silent treatments. But soon another disagreement arises and the cycle begins again. For someone with anxious attachment, the silent treatment feels unbearable, as it triggers fears of abandonment and rejection. The partner exploits this vulnerability, reinforcing a power imbalance and deepening the dependency. 9. A woman whose husband habitually cheats on her, as punishment. Instead of taking responsibility, he manipulates her emotions to maintain control and keep her in the relationship. The woman notices her husband becoming distant, spending more time away from home, being careful with his phone, or acting irritable. She feels uneasy but is afraid to confront him, worrying it will push him further away. She tries harder to be affectionate and accommodating, hoping to keep him happy. She discovers he's cheated. Perhaps she finds some texts, overhears a conversation, or hears rumors. When she confronts him, he deflects, blames her for being too controlling, or accuses her of not meeting his needs. He may escalate by calling her crazy for being upset, or turn the situation into a fight, making her feel ashamed for bringing it up. She may tell her friends and expose his behavior, and he might respond by exposing some weakness of hers. After some time, he apologizes, reeling her back in, though without sincerity, more to take back control. He may say, "It was a mistake, it didn't mean anything," or "It won't happen again," or even, "You made me do it, but I forgive you." He might shower her with attention, affection, or gifts, saying he loves her and wants to rebuild their relationship. This gives her hope that things can improve. For a while, the relationship seems stable. He spends more time at home, compliments her, and acts like the perfect partner. She believes they've turned a corner, but as soon as he feels comfortable again, or another trigger arises, the cycle begins anew. Cheating in this context is not just infidelity, it's a tool for control and manipulation. The abuser exploits their partner's love and hope for reconciliation, dependence on the relationship, or fear of abandonment to keep them trapped in the cycle. This pattern often erodes the victim's self-esteem, making them feel inadequate and further dependent on the abuser for validation. 10. A person in a romantic relationship is often criticized by their partner for minor things like forgetting to reply to a text or not noticing their partner's mood. The person begins to anticipate their partner's displeasure and tries harder to meet expectations, even walking on eggshells to avoid conflict. The partner accuses them of being uncaring or selfish, possibly yelling or withholding affection as punishment. The partner apologizes, claiming they overreacted and saying they only got upset because they care so much. Things feel stable, and the person hopes the conflict won't happen again, until the partner finds another reason to escalate. 11. An employee works for a demanding boss who continually raises expectations without providing adequate resources or recognition. The employee feels increasing stress as deadlines loom and the boss's tone becomes more critical. The boss berates the employee for missing a deadline or making a small error, threatening their job security. The boss later compliments the employee on their hard work or grants a small perk like leaving early one day. The employee feels hopeful and redoubles efforts until the next unrealistic deadline or public shaming occurs. These examples illustrate how cyclical abuse manipulates the victim's emotions, creating a pattern of fear, temporary relief, and hope that things will improve. These cycles trap individuals in toxic dynamics, making it incredibly difficult to leave or set boundaries. Cyclical abuse creates a psychological bond known as a trauma bond. The moments of relief or kindness act as a reward, giving the victim hope that things can improve. In Scientology, this is further reinforced by the belief system. Members are taught that their suffering is their own fault due to overts, sins, or withholds, hidden crimes. The promise of ultimate spiritual freedom keeps them tethered, even when the system is abusive. Fear of punishment or losing connections makes the idea of leaving seem worse than staying. This cycle is present in both domestic violence and high-control groups like Scientology. The sticks, punishments, threats, isolation, and occasional carrots, love bombing, praise, small freedoms, create a trauma bond that keeps people trapped. In both scenarios, abuse feels normal because it's all you've known. Survival instincts take over. You stay quiet, try to avoid attention, and focus on appeasing the abuser to minimize harm. Leaving feels impossible because the outside world is framed as worse, unfamiliar, or unsafe. Add to that, growing up in Scientology, you didn't know the words abuse or domestic violence. This is a deliberate feature of high-control groups. They create a specific language and worldview that isolates you from societal norms. Without the words to name your experience, you couldn't recognize it as wrong. When you entered an abusive relationship later, it likely felt familiar because it mirrored the dynamics of control, fear, and reward you'd internalized. This is a common experience for survivors. The abuse feels normal, and you don't initially see it for what it is. Unfortunately, research shows that survivors of trauma, especially those with unresolved wounds, can unconsciously give off signals that predators or abusers pick up on, making them targets. This isn't your fault. It's a reflection of the harm done to you. Things like hypercompliance. Abusers often sense when someone is willing to go along to avoid conflict. Low self-worth. Survivors of prior abuse may unconsciously doubt their value, making them more vulnerable to manipulation. Familiarity. When someone repeats familiar patterns of control, it feels normal, and you may find yourself slipping into old survival strategies, silence, subservience. And getting out of this? It's not uncommon for survivors to take years, even decades, to fully break free from these dynamics, for a number of reasons, like the abuser or system undermines your sense of self. Scientology taught you that your value was tied to your compliance. Later, your abusive partner likely echoed similar messages. Fear keeps you stuck. Leaving meant facing an unfamiliar world where you weren't sure you'd survive. Healing takes time. Even after leaving, it can take years to unlearn the belief systems and coping mechanisms instilled by abuse. Your journey to freedom is absolute proof of your resilience, but it's also totally understandable to wish it hadn't taken so long. But it makes sense that it takes a while. You were basically trained to attract dysfunction like a magnet, and abuse was so regular and accepted, it was normalized. You were groomed over time to think things that aren't healthy were totally normal. In Scientology, that looked like being told your worth depended on how much you contributed or complied, believing that criticism or control was a sign someone cared about you, thinking love or approval had to be earned through compliance, getting used to being controlled or criticized as a necessary part of growth, keeping your head down to avoid negative attention, staying silent to avoid rocking the boat, and walking on eggshells to keep the peace. Being groomed to say, "Yes, sir, I'll write up that report on why I'm a useless, awful person," without ever even needing to make eye contact. Feeling overly responsible, like it's your job to fix it. This is classic Scientology programming. Fearing leaving, thinking, "But what if it's worse without them?" Or, "Maybe this is as good as it gets." The problem is, when you leave that environment, it doesn't automatically reset your internal compass. Those same patterns can carry over into your relationships, whether with a partner, friend, or even a boss. You might not notice it at first. In fact, it can be so subtle because it doesn't feel bad. It feels familiar. And that familiarity can be comforting, even when it's not good for you. You know this territory. Abusers love this. It's like you've got a neon sign flashing, "Super low maintenance, will tolerate gaslighting, perfectly low self-esteem." Step one to avoiding this is spotting the red flags early, like before they start handing you a contract with the words "billion years" in the header. Here are a few classics. They criticize you in the name of helping you grow. "No, Susan, pointing out my every possible flaw in order to help me isn't actually constructive." You feel guilty saying no. If you're already planning your amends project in your head, that's a bad sign. They isolate you. Look, if they don't like your friends or family, they probably just want total control. It's a classic Scientology divide and conquer, protect you from the world move. The first step is noticing when a relationship starts to feel like the abusive dynamics you left behind. For me, I had to ask myself, am I shrinking myself to avoid conflict? Do I feel like I need their approval to feel okay? Am I afraid to leave because I think life will be worse without them? If the answer is yes to any of these, it might be worth taking a step back to reflect. So, let's rewrite the script. Here are a few exercises to help you unlearn those trauma responses and avoid turning into a people-pleasing shadow of your former self. Try reframing your worth. This one's huge. In Scientology, your worth was tied to your production or compliance. In healthy relationships, your worth is intrinsic. You're valuable just because you're you. Write that down somewhere if you need to, because it's easy to forget. Next time someone asks, "Do you want to go to that seminar on the power of staying silent?" say, "Nope, I like talking way too much." Seriously, practice saying no in the mirror, in the car, heck, even on your cat. She won't talk back. Set boundaries and stick to them. For real. This can be tough if you've been taught your whole life to put others first, but it's so important. Start small, like saying no to something that makes you uncomfortable. Watch how the other person reacts. Healthy people will respect your boundaries. Controlling people will push back or make you feel guilty. If someone gets mad because you won't overextend yourself, that's their problem, not yours. Play name the red flag. If something feels off, say it out loud, to yourself or even to them. This feels like bullying. If they react poorly, run. Check in with your gut and learn to trust it. If something feels off, like you're being controlled or criticized too much, pause and listen to that instinct. It's your internal red flag detector. After Scientology, a lot of us have learned to ignore our instincts because we were taught they couldn't be trusted. But that little voice inside you, it's there for a reason. If something feels off, like someone is being overly critical controlling, or isolating you, don't dismiss it. Sit with that feeling and ask yourself, does this remind me of anything? Talk it out with a trusted friend. Sometimes it's hard to see these patterns when you're in them. A trauma-informed therapist, a trusted friend, or even a survivor community can help you unpack what's happening and give you perspective. You're not alone in this. Journal your wins, no matter how small. Every time you set a boundary or walk away from something unhealthy, it's proof that you're growing and healing. Extra credit. Okay. While we're here, let's also look at another harmful situation that was normalized for us: exploitation. It's something that doesn't always get labeled as abuse, but is definitely in the same neighborhood. You know, those relationships, whether it's a boss, a friend, or even someone you barely know, where they're constantly pushing your boundaries, taking advantage, or expecting way more from you than they give. Sound familiar? Let's break down how to spot this kind of dynamic, why it feels so familiar to survivors, and what to do about it. When we think of abuse, we often picture the really extreme stuff: domestic violence, control, gaslighting. And that's real, but there's another layer that's harder to spot. Exploitation can happen in relationships that aren't overtly abusive, but still leave you feeling undervalued, used, or drained. For example, your boss keeps piling on tasks outside your job description, but never offers a raise or even a thank you. Or a friend who only shows up when they need something, or always expects you to listen to their problems, but they disappear when you need support. Or a relative keeps borrowing money or expecting favors without acknowledging the strain it puts on you. Or worse, acts like you owe it to them. Survivors of high control groups or abusive relationships are often conditioned to give too much. Here's why. You were absolutely taught to prioritize others over yourself. In Scientology, for example, your worth was tied to how much you produced for the group. That mindset can carry into adulthood. You might fear conflict or rejection. Saying no feels risky if you've been punished for it in the past. You want to prove your value, especially if you've been told you're only valuable when you're helping others. You might overextend yourself in relationships or work. It can be tricky to recognize these dynamics because they don't always scream abuse. But here's some signs. You're always the one giving more. Whether it's time, energy, or resources, the balance feels off. They don't respect your boundaries. Maybe they push you to work late, guilt trip you into plans, or ignore your no. You feel drained, resentful, or used. If every interaction leaves you feeling like you've lost something, that's a red flag. So how do we start pushing back against these dynamics and reclaiming your energy? Name it. Start by acknowledging what's happening. It's not selfish to notice when someone is taking more than they give. Set clear boundaries. Practice saying no to small things first. For example, I can't stay late today, or I'm not available for that right now. Check the balance. Take a step back and ask yourself, is this relationship fair? Am I being valued here? Ask for what you need. If the person genuinely cares, they'll respond positively to a conversation about balance. If not, that tells you a lot. Try the fairness test. If you're noticing these patterns, write down what you give and what you get in a relationship or job. Is the balance fair? If not, what needs to change? Exploitation isn't always as obvious as abuse, but if you've been feeling drained, used, or undervalued, it's worth taking a closer look at your relationships, whether it's a boss, a friend, or even a family member. Breaking these patterns takes practice, but it's absolutely worth it. As survivors, we're often drawn to what feels familiar. even if it's not good for us. Whether it's a controlling partner, a demanding boss, or a boundary-pushing friend, these dynamics can feel normal because they echo what we experienced in the past. But here's the truth. You don't owe anyone your time, energy, or compliance just to keep the peace. Every little step you take, whether it's setting a boundary, trusting your gut, or walking away from something that feels wrong, gets you closer to real freedom. Breaking free from cycles of abuse, whether in Scientology, an abusive relationship, or a toxic workplace, is no small feat. It requires awareness, support, and the courage to challenge deeply ingrained patterns of control and self-doubt. If you've experienced these cycles, know that you're not alone. You are not the cause of the abuse, nor are you powerless to change your future. You are worthy of relationships, environments, and communities that nurture your growth rather than exploit your vulnerabilities. By recognizing these patterns, speaking out, and supporting others, you help pave the way for change, not just for yourself, but for others still trapped in these cycles. So let's rewrite the script together. Freedom is possible, and healing is worth it.